Okay, so we talked about the different strategies that we use to provide value to customers. The low-cost strategy versus the differentiation strategy. Now let's talk a little about the business models and how business models work. And now it goes back to our definition of marketing on how we're going to create, deliver, and capture value. And that's going to be derived basically from our business models. From a base element, what we need to do to look at business models is to understand who are the market or who are the customer segments we're serving, what are the projects and services or solution experiences we're providing, and then ultimately, how do we create value, how do we deliver value, and how do we capture value? By answering those elements, that we can get a good definition of how business models really work for different organizations. So business models themselves provide a source of differentiation and competitive advantage for companies. And so if you look at business models, a lot of companies come on with innovative business models that actually are different than traditionally how those businesses in different industries either competed or how they worked. And so one example that I want to share with you I'm familiar with is a company called Minute Clinic. So I was a founder of this company. So Minute Clinic was a retail healthcare model that was like the first of its kind. That was a different delivery system for delivering healthcare. And how this business came about is a friend of mine took his son to the emergency room and waited for 8 or 9 hours and was so fed up with the process that we got together, a couple guys, and we actually whiteboarded up kind of what the challenges were with healthcare and what might be a solution. So we basically, the classic story of back of a napkin, we basically invented this retail healthcare concept in terms of what it should look like or what it would want. So while we didn't create the ultimate business model in that first meeting, we directionally said, well, what value do we want to provide, or what value was missing from the traditional model? And so the frustration with the traditional emergency room or healthcare model resulted in this. And so I'm going to show you a couple elements in terms of how this model came about. At the end of the day, we're going to talk about value proposition. And so the value proposition we were trying to offer at Minute Clinic was much different and appealed to different needs than the traditional healthcare model. So let's talk about that. So looking at like the who, what, how questions, it's always a great idea to take things and put it into simple questions, and you can get a lot of understanding from asking the simple questions. So if I look at the two models, I look at the retail healthcare model like Minute Clinic, and I look at that compared to the traditional approach. One of the things that's the same is that we were targeting everybody. We wanted everybody to take advantage of this new delivery model for healthcare, right? So we were trying to solve a different set of problems. But where a traditional approach in healthcare was full treatment, covered by insurance, and had other things at additional cost, we were focusing on quick, rapid diagnostic treatment. So when we first started this concept, we focused really on strep tests or rapid testing services and then giving prescriptions. The other interesting thing when we started this model, now you see them at Target and you see them at CVS, and everybody uses these. When we first started this idea, this was a foreign concept. And the first time we tested this business model, we actually built a kiosk and tested inside a Cub food store. And so people were kind of freaked out by that, and they didn't like that Cub is where I buy my food. How can I get my health care in there? So there's hurdles to overcome. So how we were communicating value to this particular need in healthcare had to be a little bit different because it was foreign to people in terms of, I'm going to go get my health care in a retail store. So how we ethically had to communicate value was much different. But the value proposition we were offering was much different too. So typically a traditional approach in healthcare, there's a lot of cost associated with that, and wait time and staff, et cetera. What our model was we wanted a simple, low-cost infrastructure. So we staffed this not with a doctor, but with a nurse practitioner that could handle a certain variety of treatments and add value to the consumers in a more quick, cost-effective way. Initially, we didn't even take insurance, but you could go get quick care and be happy with it. And so we were trying to provide customer service and customer experience that met those needs. At the center of any business model is the value proposition. What value that we are going to provide to a customer. That's the center. So one of the things that's interesting in value proposition is people throw this word around a lot. And if I have an executive ed class or another class, and you ask people, like, how many people have a value proposition, right? So in a class of 40 people, all 40 people would raise their hands. And what happens is then say, okay, who can tell me that? Who can articulate what their value proposition is? Maybe 1 or 2 people out of those 40 people can do it. So value proposition, even though it's at the center, and it's really important concept, a lot of people can't articulate it. At the end of the day, what matters is you can really view your value proposition as the implicit promise that we're making to a customer to deliver some sort of value. So it's a simple concept, but it's really misunderstood by many people. But like I said, it's the center point of the business model. You have to have a good value proposition in order to have a competitive business. So really in a value proposition, you can define it as two really sources of value. It's either really the bundle of products or services that we create for a particular customer and why you choose one business or another, or it's really the mix of elements, like we talked about, maybe some of the differentiation, and it can be on a lot of different elements: speed, price, convenience, service, customer service. It's really how do we articulate the set of values to solve a particular need or problem that a customer has. That's what value proposition is. This is just an example of taking the needs of the customer as articulated in terms of wants, needs, fears, etc., and then matching it with the benefits and features of a particular product. And so this is just a way to articulate it, again, going back to kind of those simple words in terms of how, why, what. Okay, so if you can define the how, why, what, a lot of times you're going to go a long way in terms of defining the value proposition for a particular company and service. Okay, so this slide basically just takes that and brings it to life in terms of how that business model canvas can illustrate kind of the value of from a product standpoint and a customer standpoint. Okay, so we've been talking about value proposition and probably giving a little bit of overkill, but like this is an example. This slide right here is an example of how a business model looks. And you can see that the value proposition is at the center of the business model. The value proposition itself drives everything else that happens in the business model. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this model, a business model. We're going to look at this model and see how infrastructure, the customer, the cost structure all fits, and ultimately how that relates to strategy and marketing of an organization.